Imagine sitting on a crowded city bus, headphones in, minding your own business, when suddenly, the sound of sharp, cutting words slices through the hum of the engine and chatter around you. That's exactly what happened on one ordinary Tuesday morning. A man's voice rose above the noise, dripping with sarcasm and cruelty, but it wasn't aimed at a stranger. No, it was directed at his own daughter sitting beside him. And what made it worse? Every single person on that bus could hear it. Before we dive deeper, let me quickly pause here. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, if you believe kindness and courage still matter in today's world, then hit that like button and subscribe to Threads of Kindness. It's the best way to support stories that show how compassion and bravery can change lives. Now, let's continue. The man, a father in his mid-40s with rough features and tired eyes, leaned back in his seat and smirked as his daughter tried to talk to him. She couldn't have been more than 12, skinny, with a backpack too big for her frame, her hair in a messy ponytail. She had a sketchbook in her lap, nervously flipping through pages she had drawn, perhaps hoping to share her art with him. "What's that supposed to be?" he sneered loud enough for others to hear. "You call that drawing? Looks like a 5-year-old scribbled on paper. You'll never make anything out of that nonsense." The girl's face dropped, her small hands clutching the book as if trying to hide her world from his cruelty. She didn't respond, didn't argue. She simply shrank into her seat, pulling her knees closer, eyes fixed on the floor. The bus grew quieter as passengers noticed the exchange. A few cast uneasy glances. Some shook their heads, but no one spoke up. The father chuckled, clearly enjoying the sting of his words. He went on, mocking her clothes, her messy hair, even the way she was sitting. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "I should have left you at home. Who's going to take you seriously looking like that?" Each word landed like a blow, and the girl winced as if she were used to this routine. But what neither the father nor the passengers realized was that 3 rows behind them sat a man who noticed everything. A man whose training and life experience had prepared him to handle far more than hostile words. He was broad-shouldered, calm, with the quiet but commanding presence of someone who had seen battles most people could only imagine. His name was David, a retired Navy SEAL who rarely traveled this bus route but had chosen it that morning by chance. He had endured missions in far-off countries, but as he listened to the cruelty unfolding in front of him, he felt a deeper kind of injustice stirring inside. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes studying the girl's trembling hands and the father's satisfied grin. David wasn't the type to interfere in every argument he overheard, but this wasn't just an argument. This was a father tearing down his own child in public, robbing her of dignity, crushing her spirit. He could see the way the girl tried to disappear into herself, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. His jaw tightened. He knew the scars words could leave, sometimes deeper than any physical wound. He also knew that silence, the choice everyone else on that bus seemed to make, was just another form of cruelty. He decided, then and there, that he would not be silent. As the bus rolled forward, its engine rumbling, the scene unfolded like a painful movie. The girl eventually whispered something, an attempt to defend herself, but the father cut her off with another jab. "Save your excuses. You'll never be good enough. You should thank me for telling you the truth." At that moment, David rose from his seat, his tall frame moving down the aisle with quiet, controlled steps. No one knew what he was about to do, but there was something in his calm stride that made heads turn. And this is where our story truly begins, on a crowded bus, with a broken-hearted girl, a cruel father, and a Navy SEAL ready to take action. The bus jolted as it hit a bump, the lights flickering for just a second, but the real electricity in the air came from David's presence as he closed the distance between himself and the mocking father. Passengers leaned back in their seats, eyes wide, wondering what would happen next. David didn't storm forward with anger or aggression. No, his steps were measured, his face calm but unreadable, the way only someone with years of discipline could carry themselves. The father, busy scrolling through his phone after his last jab, barely noticed until a shadow fell over him. "Excuse me," David said in a low, steady voice, the kind that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. The father looked up, eyebrows furrowed, clearly irritated that someone dared to interrupt him. "What's your problem?" he asked sharply. David didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the girl, who was now clutching her sketchbook tightly to her chest as if it were her only shield. Then he turned back to the father. "That girl deserves better than the words you're throwing at her," David said evenly. "She's your daughter, not your punching bag." The father scoffed, a laugh full of disbelief and arrogance. "Oh, here we go," he said loudly, gesturing to the rest of the bus. "Another stranger who thinks he knows how to raise my kid. You think you're some kind of hero." His words were laced with venom, but David didn't flinch. Instead, he crouched slightly, lowering his voice so it was calm but firm, directed at the girl. "Don't ever believe those words," he told her. "Your drawings are worth something because they come from you. Don't let anyone, no matter who they are, tell you otherwise." The girl's eyes widened in shock, as though no adult had ever defended her before. For the first time that morning, a flicker of hope lit up in her gaze. The father bristled, shifting in his seat. "Hey, buddy, back off. This is none of your business. She needs to hear the truth before the world eats her alive. That's called parenting." His voice was louder now, defensive, but beneath the bravado there was a flash of unease. Something about David's calm presence unsettled him. "Parenting," David repeated softly, tilting his head. "Parenting is guiding, protecting, and encouraging. What you're doing is humiliating. There's a difference." His voice didn't rise, but the authority in it was undeniable. A few passengers nodded subtly, murmurs of agreement rippling through the bus. The father looked around and noticed the eyes on him. For the first time, he seemed less confident. But instead of backing down, he snapped. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. She's my kid, not yours." His words were sharp, but David's gaze remained steady. "You're right," David said. "I don't know you, but I know what it feels like to be torn down by people who should have lifted me up. I know what it's like to carry scars from words that cut deeper than knives. And I know one more thing. One day, she'll remember this moment. She'll remember whether her father stood by her or against her. Is this how you want her to remember you?" The bus fell completely silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The girl's small eyes brimmed with tears, but this time they weren't only from pain, they carried a spark of something new, something like relief. Someone, finally, was standing up for her. The father shifted uncomfortably, glancing away as though searching for an escape, but his pride wouldn't let him admit fault. "You don't get it," he muttered, his tone less sharp now, more defensive than cruel. "Life doesn't hand out kindness. I'm toughening her up." David straightened to his full height, towering over him. "Life is hard enough on its own," he replied. "A daughter doesn't need her father to be her first enemy. She needs him to be her first protector." The words landed heavy, not just for the father but for everyone listening. A woman in the back quietly wiped her eyes, a young man shook his head, and even the bus driver glanced in the mirror, visibly moved. The father clenched his jaw, clearly torn between his ego and the undeniable truth pressing against him. Meanwhile, the girl, still clutching her sketchbook, looked up at David as though he were a lifeline in a storm. The tension in the air was unbearable, and the bus itself seemed to slow, every second stretching longer than the last. The father opened his mouth as if to retort, but no words came. Instead, he looked away, tapping his fingers against his knee, fuming silently. David didn't push further. He had planted the seed, and he knew it was enough for now. He returned his gaze to the girl and gave her a small, reassuring nod. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a tiny smile. But this was only the beginning. David knew the moment he chose to stand up, he had stepped into something bigger than just a bus ride. The silence after David's words lingered like a heavy cloud, broken only by the steady hum of the bus engine and the occasional cough from a passenger. The father sat stiffly, clearly unsettled, but his pride wouldn't let him surrender. He turned his head sharply toward David, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you?" he said with a bitter laugh, his voice louder again, desperate to reclaim the dominance he had lost. "What gives you the right to lecture me about how I treat my kid? You don't know what kind of pressure I'm under. You don't know the sacrifices I've made. You don't know me." His words spilled out like daggers, aimed to wound. The girl shrank again, bracing herself for another storm, but David didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned against the pole next to their seats, his arms crossed casually, but his eyes sharp as steel. "You're right about one thing," David said steadily. "I don't know your life. I don't know the weight you carry. But I do know what it's like to carry pain, and I know the difference between using that pain to break others or using it to build them up." His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried through the bus with unmistakable authority. The father scoffed, though there was a trace of unease in his expression now. "Oh yeah, and what makes you such an expert?" he sneered. "What, you've had a tough life too?" Boo-hoo. His sarcasm dripped with disdain, but behind it was something else, fear, maybe, or recognition. David's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. I spent 15 years in the Navy, he said. Most of that time as a SEAL. I've seen people break under pressure. I've seen strong men fall apart when they thought they couldn't take it anymore. And I've seen others rise, not because they were the toughest, but because someone believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. He paused, letting the words sink in. A collective hush fell over the bus, passengers leaning closer without realizing it. David continued, his tone lower, more personal. I had a father, too. Not much different from you. He thought tough love meant tearing me down, reminding me every day how I'd never be enough. He thought words couldn't hurt, but he was wrong. They followed me into every mission, every fight, every dark night I spent wondering if I was strong enough. And let me tell you, surviving war zones was easier than surviving the voice in my own head that sounded just like him. The girl's eyes widened, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at David. The father shifted uncomfortably, his jaw working as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. David took a slow breath, steady and deliberate. You want to prepare your daughter for the world. Then teach her strength by building her up, not breaking her down. Teach her that her voice matters. Teach her that she's worth more than anyone's opinion, including yours. That's the only kind of tough love that lasts. His words cut through the father's defenses, not sharp and cruel like the man's had been, but heavy, undeniable truths that pierced deeper than he expected. For a moment, the father looked away, staring out the window as the city blurred past. His hand twitched against his knee, a restless rhythm betraying the storm inside him. The other passengers watched silently, their faces a mixture of admiration and hope. They weren't just witnessing a confrontation, they were witnessing a lesson unfold, one that resonated far beyond this single bus ride. Finally, the father turned back, his voice quieter but edged with bitterness. You think a little speech changes anything? He muttered. You don't know what it's like to work every day, to break your back, and come home to bills you can't pay. She doesn't understand real life, and if I don't drill it into her now, she'll fail. David leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady, unwavering. I do know what it's like, he said firmly. I know what it's like to feel crushed under weight you think you can't carry. But the answer isn't taking that weight and dropping it on your child's shoulders. It's carrying it with her until she's strong enough to lift her own. That's what a father does. His words reverberated through the bus, and for the first time, the father's hardened expression faltered. He blinked rapidly, his lips pressed into a thin line as though fighting something deep within himself, something he didn't want to acknowledge. The girl, her cheeks wet, held her sketchbook tighter but lifted her chin ever so slightly. A spark of courage, ignited by David's words, began to glow within her. The father leaned back against his seat, staring at the floor, his silence louder than any insult he could have thrown. David didn't press him further. He had said what needed to be said, and sometimes silence was the only way for truth to sink in. The bus rattled on, but inside, it felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. David glanced at the girl one more time and offered a reassuring nod, his eyes telling her what words could not. You matter. You are strong. You are not alone. But even as a fragile peace settled over the bus, David knew the confrontation wasn't over. The father's pride was still simmering, and the real question wasn't whether David had spoken, it was whether the man was willing to listen. For several minutes, the bus rattled forward in uneasy silence, the tension still hanging thick in the air. Passengers stared out the windows or fidgeted in their seats, pretending not to listen but unable to tune out the storm they all knew was far from over. The father sat stiffly, arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tightly that a vein throbbed at his temple. His pride burned hotter with every second of quiet, feeding on the looks he had caught from strangers, pity, judgment, shame. He hated it. He hated feeling small. His fists balled on his knees as if gripping invisible weapons. Finally, unable to contain himself, he snapped his head toward David. You think you're some kind of savior, don't you? He spat, his voice sharp and venomous. You don't know me. You don't know how much I've given up. You waltz in here with your little war stories and think you can tell me how to raise my kid. You don't get it. You don't know the kind of pressure I face every single day. His words echoed through the bus, bitter and loud, and his daughter winced, shrinking down again as though trying to make herself invisible. David didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his body still, but his eyes burned with steady intensity. He waited until the father's rant ended, until the man's own voice wore him down, and then he spoke, low, controlled, each word deliberate. You're right, I don't know the exact pressures you face. But I know this: pain doesn't excuse cruelty. Struggle doesn't justify breaking someone else down, least of all your child. That's not strength. That's surrender. His words landed heavy, stripping the father's anger of its armor. For the first time, the man's bluster faltered, his shoulders slumping just slightly. But then, as if realizing the eyes of the bus were still on him, he lashed out again. What do you know about strength, huh? Sitting here preaching like you're some saint. Bet you've never had to come home from a 12-hour shift with nothing in your pocket but bills waiting on the table. Bet you've never felt like a failure in your own house. His voice cracked, just faintly, betraying a raw truth beneath the rage. David's gaze softened, but his words didn't lose their edge. You're wrong, he said quietly. I've felt that. I've walked through doors after missions overseas, after seeing men not make it home, and I've faced empty silence that screamed louder than gunfire. I've sat in kitchens with nothing but overdue bills and the weight of wondering if I was worth anything at all. I've felt failure gnawing at my chest. But I made a choice, not to bleed that pain onto the people I loved. Because the world is cruel enough already. They needed me to be their shield, not their sword. His voice grew stronger, his presence filling the bus like a tide rising against the shore. And your daughter, she doesn't need a critic. She doesn't need a bully. She needs a father who believes in her, even when the rest of the world doesn't. Because if you don't, who will? The father froze, his breath caught in his chest, the truth pressing against walls he had built for years. His eyes darted to his daughter, who was staring at him with wide, wet eyes, silent but pleading. He looked away quickly, his throat working, but the lump there refused to go down. Passengers shifted in their seats, the quiet of the bus so thick it felt sacred. David's words weren't just for him anymore, they were for everyone listening. A young man at the back blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. An older woman clutched her bag tighter, nodding faintly. The driver even slowed slightly, as if reluctant to miss a word. But pride is a stubborn thing, and the father clung to it like a lifeline. He leaned back in his seat, shaking his head, his voice lower but trembling. You make it sound so easy, he muttered. Like flipping a switch. But it's not. It's not easy to be strong for someone else when you feel like you're drowning yourself. His confession slipped out before he could stop it, raw and jagged, and his daughter's eyes widened at the honesty she had never heard from him before. David didn't pounce on the weakness. He didn't use it to win. Instead, he nodded, slow and understanding. You're right, it's not easy. It's the hardest thing in the world. But that's what makes it worth it. That's what makes it fatherhood. Real strength isn't in shouting louder. It's in choosing love when every bone in your body is tired. It's in fighting for your child's heart the same way you fight for your own survival. His voice softened, but the steel never left it. You're drowning. Then don't pull her down with you. Let her be the reason you swim. The words cracked something inside the father. His face contorted, torn between shame and realization, between the walls he had built and the truth now pressing against them. He looked again at his daughter, at the tears streaking her cheeks, at the way she hugged her sketchbook as if it were the last piece of herself. For the first time, he didn't see her as a burden or an embarrassment. He saw her as a child longing for his approval, aching for his love. His lips parted, but no words came. His throat closed tight. He turned away, dragging a hand over his face as if hiding the cracks forming in his armor. David didn't press further. He had done what he came to do, not by force, but by truth. Now it was up to the father to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. The bus rolled on, carrying not just passengers but the heavy weight of a choice hanging in the air. A choice only one man could make. The bus hissed as it slowed to pick up more passengers, but inside, no one moved. Every eye stayed fixed on the father, who now sat hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The man who had mocked his own daughter so loudly minutes ago was suddenly quiet, swallowed by the weight of everything David had said. The daughter, her small frame still trembling, stared at him with uncertainty. She wanted to believe this moment mattered. She wanted to believe her father could change. But after years of cruel words, hope was hard to hold on to. David remained standing nearby, his presence calm, steady, not pressing but not leaving either. He understood something everyone else on that bus was only beginning to realize. Change doesn't happen in a single instant, but sometimes a single moment plants the seed. Finally, the father lifted his head, his eyes red and wet, though he tried to blink it away. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time in years. His voice cracked when he spoke. I'm sorry. The words were low, almost broken, but they carried more weight than any of his insults ever had. The girl gasped softly, her lips parting, her eyes flooding with fresh tears. She didn't know whether to trust it, but she couldn't deny what she had just heard. The father swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. I've been wrong, he admitted, his words halting, uneven. I thought I was making you stronger by being hard on you. I thought if I pointed out your flaws, you wouldn't get crushed out there. But all I did was crush you myself. His voice cracked again, and he reached up, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. The bus was so silent it felt as though the world outside had stopped. His daughter's small hands trembled as she lowered the sketchbook from her chest, slowly, cautiously, as if offering it again. I just wanted you to see them, she whispered. I just wanted you to be proud. The father's lips quivered, and he took the book gently from her hands, opening it with shaking fingers. His eyes scanned the pages, the messy pencil lines, the colors bleeding into shapes only a child's imagination could create. For the first time, he didn't scoff. He didn't laugh. He swallowed hard and whispered, "They're beautiful." The girl's breath hitched, and tears spilled down her face, but this time they weren't only from pain. For the first time in a long time, she had heard the words she had longed for. She leaned into him cautiously, and to his own surprise, the father wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. His face crumpled as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." The bus passengers shifted, some wiping their own eyes. A middle-aged woman clasped her hands to her chest. A young man pulled out his phone but quickly set it down, realizing this was too sacred to record. David watched quietly, a faint but knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to say anything more. He had done his part, not by force, not by anger, but by truth. The father wasn't healed, not yet, but a seed had been planted. Whether it grew depended on him, but at least now, it had a chance. The girl caught David's eye and mouthed a quiet, "Thank you." He nodded back, his gaze steady and kind. As the bus neared his stop, David pulled the cord and prepared to step off. The passengers parted slightly, as though giving space to someone they knew was more than just another commuter. Before leaving, he looked back once more at the father and daughter. "Remember," he said gently, "the world will give her enough battles. Don't be the first one she has to fight." Then he stepped off, his boots hitting the pavement with quiet finality. The bus doors closed behind him, and as it pulled away, the father sat holding his daughter, still clutching her sketchbook, for once not as a weapon against her but as a bridge between them. And that, friends, is where we leave this story, on a city bus where a Navy SEAL reminded a broken man what it means to be a father, and gave a little girl the courage to believe in herself again. Moments like these remind us that kindness, courage, and compassion are not just small acts, they are powerful enough to change lives. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the power of words and the strength of standing up for what's right, then please hit that like button and subscribe to Threads of Kindness. Together, we can spread more stories that inspire hope, healing, and change.